I used to think stability was the same thing as happiness. That if nothing was breaking, then nothing needed fixing. From the outside, my life looked settled, even enviable. A steady relationship. Familiar routines. Someone who knew my habits, my silences, my moods. We shared a space, a history, a rhythm that had formed over years. And yet, somewhere along the way, that rhythm turned into background noise. Most days followed the same pattern. Wake up, exchange a few practical words, move through responsibilities, return home tired. We sat next to each other more than we faced each other. Conversations became updates instead of connections. We talked about work, bills, plans for someday, but rarely about how we actually felt. Not because we didn't care, but because it felt unnecessary to ask. We assumed we already knew that. I told myself this was normal. That this was what long-term love looked like when the excitement faded and real life took over. Comfort. Predictability. Safety. And for a while, that explanation worked. It helped me ignore the quiet heaviness in my chest when the day ended and nothing meaningful had happened between us. It helped me justify the way I sometimes felt lonelier with them than I ever did alone. There was no big argument. No betrayal. No obvious reason to feel dissatisfied. That made the emptiness worse. I felt ungrateful for wanting more, ashamed for feeling bored, selfish for craving something I couldn't even define. I loved them. I still do. That was the most confusing part. Love was there, but it felt distant, like a memory instead of a living thing that I noticed the change in small moments. The way we stopped laughing over nothing. The way silence stretched longer without feeling comfortable. The way I started keeping thoughts to myself because explaining them felt like too much effort. I wasn't hiding anything yet, but I was withdrawing. Slowly. Quietly. Almost politely.It night, lying beside someone who knew my body but not my mind anymore, I would stare at the ceiling and replay the day. Nothing bad had happened. And that was the problem. Nothing good had happened either. It felt like I was watching my own life from a distance, participating just enough to keep everything running, but never fully present. That I started wondering when I had last felt excited about anything that wasn't a plan or a responsibility. When I had last felt seen without having to explain myself. When I had last felt chosen, not out of habit, but out of desire. Those questions scared me, so I pushed them down and told myself to be patient. To be mature. To be grateful. Trying something new wasn't a decision at first. It was a thought. A whisper. A harmless curiosity that showed up when I was tired of pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to cheat. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to feel alive again, even if that feeling came from somewhere unexpected. That I convinced myself that wanting more didn't mean I loved less. That questioning my happiness didn't automatically make me a bad person. I told myself everyone feels this way sometimes, that relationships go through phases, that this would pass if I ignored it long enough. But the truth has a way of staying, even when you don't invite it. There was a growing gap between who I was and who I pretended to be. Outwardly calm, inwardly restless. Faithful in action, but drifting in thought. I hadn't crossed any lines, but I was standing close enough to see them clearly. And instead of stepping back, I lingered. Looking back, I realized this was the moment everything started to shift. Not because I did something wrong, but because I stopped listening to what was right. I mistook silence for peace and routine for security. I didn't understand then that neglect doesn't always look like absence. Sometimes it looks like staying, while slowly disappearing, that I didn't know yet that trying something new would change everything. I only knew that staying exactly the same was quietly breaking me. It started in a way that felt almost insulting in its simplicity. No dramatic spark. No instant pull I could point to and name. Just a conversation that didn't feel heavy. Words that flowed without effort. A presence that didn't ask anything from me except honesty, and even that came naturally, that I didn't go looking for it. That's what I told myself, and for a while, I believed it. It slipped into my life through a crack I hadn't admitted was there. A moment of boredom. A passing interaction. Something that should have ended as quickly as it began. Instead, it stayed. What struck me first wasn't attraction. It was ease. The way I didn't feel the need to filter myself. The way I could say something small and feel like it mattered. I laughed more than I had in months, maybe years, and the laughter surprised me. It reminded me of a version of myself I thought I'd outgrown. At first, it felt harmless. Conversations spaced far apart, casual in tone. I didn't hide them, because there was nothing to hide. Or so I claimed. I wasn't lying to anyone. I wasn't betraying anything. I was just talking. Just listening. Just enjoying the feeling of being noticed, but enjoyment has a way of sharpening your awareness. I started looking forward to those moments. Not obsessively, not desperately, but enough to notice their absence. Enough to feel a quiet lift when they happened. I caught myself smiling at nothing, carrying that energy into the rest of my day. That's when the justifications began. Soft ones. Reasonable ones. Everyone needs friends. Everyone deserves connection. I wasn't crossing any lines. I wasn't replacing anyone. I still went home to the same life, the same person, the same responsibilities. Nothing had changed. Except something had. That I began sharing things I hadn't shared in a long time. Not secrets, exactly, but thoughts. Frustrations. Little pieces of myself that had gone untouched. They listened without interrupting, without fixing, without assuming. And I realized how long it had been since I felt truly heard. The guilt didn't arrive immediately. It crept in slowly, disguised as caution. A pause before replying. A second thought before mentioning a detail. I told myself I was just being respectful. That not everything needed to be shared. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I liked having something that was just mine. That I noticed the contrast more clearly then. How quiet my primary relationship felt in comparison. How heavy conversations seemed when they used to be effortless. I hated myself for making that comparison, but once it existed, I couldn't erase it. I tried to remind myself of history, of loyalty, of love built over time. And it worked, until it didn't. What scared me most wasn't the other person. It was how quickly I adapted to the feeling. How natural it felt to open up. How easily I compartmentalized. I hadn't touched anyone. I hadn't promised anything. But emotionally, I was standing closer than I should have been. That I set rules in my head. Clear boundaries that made me feel in control. No flirting. No late nights. No conversations that crossed into intimacy. And for a while, those rules held. Until they didn't. Until one message arrived at the wrong moment, when I felt particularly unseen, and I answered without thinking. That was the shift. Subtle, but undeniable. The conversations changed tone. Not explicit. Not inappropriate. Just warmer. more personal. We acknowledged the connection without naming it. That unspoken awareness made everything feel charged, like standing near a wire you know is live. That I told myself I could handle it. That I was strong enough to stop before anything happened. That knowing I could step back at any time meant I wasn't doing anything wrong. Control became my favorite illusion. It made me feel responsible, even as I drifted further from where I started.It home. Nothing looked different. That made it easier and harder at the same time. Easier because no one questioned me. Harder because I felt like I was carrying something invisible and heavy. I found myself distracted, less patient, more distant. Not intentionally. Just emotionally occupied elsewhere. That I started to realize that the line I thought I hadn't crossed was already behind me. Emotional closeness doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, quietly rearranging priorities. I hadn't betrayed anyone in action yet, but in intention, I was no longer fully where I claimed to be. Trying something new still felt like a thought, not a choice. But the thought had weight now. And I could feel it pulling me forward, even as I told myself I was standing still. I knew the moment it happened that there would be no clean way back. Not because it was dramatic or explosive, but because it felt inevitable in a way that scared me. The line didn't feel like a wall I crashed through. It felt like a step I took after standing too close for too long. There was no rush of triumph. No victory. Just a heavy awareness settling in my chest the second I allowed myself to cross from restraint into permission. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt afterward, as if the world hadn't noticed what I had just changed. That silence was worse than panic would have been. That I expected excitement to carry me, to justify what I'd done. Instead, guilt arrived almost immediately, sharp and clear. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that watches you closely. The kind that follows you into every interaction and asks who you think you are now. That I didn't stop caring about the person I was with before. That truth complicated everything. I still loved them. I still recognized their presence as familiar, grounding, real. But now there was something between us that only I could feel. A fracture I couldn't point to, but couldn't ignore either. At the same time, the new connection deepened. Not in fantasy, but in attachment. It felt anchored in understanding rather than illusion, which made it harder to dismiss. I wasn't escaping my life. I was adding another layer to it, one that demanded attention, secrecy, and emotional energy I didn't have to spare. That I became hyper-aware of myself. Every word I spoke felt measured. Every reaction felt slightly delayed, as if I was always checking which version of me was responding. I hated that split more than the act itself. I missed feeling whole. Honest. Uncomplicated. Fear became constant, but not of being caught. I was more afraid of what continuing would turn me into. I noticed how easily I could justify small lies. How quickly omission felt acceptable. I told myself I was protecting people from pain, but deep down I knew I was protecting myself from consequences. The thrill people talk about never really came. What came instead was intensity. Emotional gravity. A sense that I was now orbiting two different truths, neither of which I could fully commit to without destroying the other. That tension drained me. Sleep felt shallow. Silence felt loud. That I started noticing the cost in unexpected places. In my patience thinning. In my reactions sharpening. In the way I avoided eye contact longer than usual, as if eye contact itself might ask questions I couldn't answer. I wasn't just hiding an action. I was hiding a state of mind. With the new person, honesty felt easier and harder at the same time. Easier because I wanted to be seen fully. Harder because being seen meant being exposed. They knew I was conflicted. They felt it in my pauses, in my hesitation. I could sense their hope growing alongside my fear, and that realization sat heavy with responsibility that I tried to regain control by setting emotional limits, but limits mean nothing once attachment exists. You can't negotiate with feelings after you've invited them in. I learned that too late. Every attempt to pull back only made the pull stronger. Absence didn't bring clarity. It brought longing, the weight of choice pressed down on me then. I couldn't pretend this was temporary anymore. I couldn't tell myself it would fade on its own. Something had already changed in me. I was no longer reacting. I was participating. And participation meant accountability, whether I wanted it or not. What surprised me most was how alone I felt despite being connected to two people. I belonged fully to neither. I was present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Love, in all its forms, surrounded me, yet I felt isolated inside my own decisions. That I began to understand that crossing the line wasn't the moment everything broke. It was the moment everything demanded an answer. I could no longer stay suspended between comfort and desire. Between loyalty and honesty. Between who I had been and who I was becoming. The echo of that choice followed me everywhere. In quiet moments. In shared ones. In the spaces where I used to feel certain. I didn't know yet what I would do, only that pretending nothing had happened was no longer an option. Whatever came next would cost me something. And deep down, I knew I had already started paying. The hardest part wasn't choosing between two people. It was accepting that no choice would leave me untouched. I had spent so long delaying the moment, hoping clarity would arrive on its own, that I didn't notice how much damage indecision was already doing. To them. To me. To whatever version of honesty I still believed in. That I reached a point where the silence became heavier than the truth. Every day I carried it forward felt like another quiet betrayal. Not just of someone else, but of myself. I was tired of managing emotions instead of living them. Tired of measuring words. Tired of waking up already exhausted by the weight of what I hadn't said. When the decision finally came, it didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Like stepping into cold water you've been avoiding, knowing the shock will hurt but the standing still has hurt longer. There was no dramatic speech rehearsed in my head. No perfect explanation. Just the truth, stripped of decoration, because anything else would have been another lie. That I learned quickly that honesty doesn't soften pain. It clarifies it. The hurt in their eyes wasn't loud, but it was deep, and it's something I'll carry with me longer than any moment of desire that led me here. Watching someone realize the life they trusted wasn't as solid as they believed changes you. It forces you to confront the reality of your impact. There was no clean break. No moment where everything made sense again. Just aftermath. Questions without answers. Space where routine used to be. I had wanted transformation, and I got it, just not in the form I imagined. Trying something new didn't give me freedom. It gave me responsibility. The other connection didn't feel like an escape anymore either. Without secrecy, it lost its illusion. What remained was real, but complicated, shaped by the circumstances that brought it into existence. I had to face the fact that no relationship can thrive on the ruins of another without carrying that weight forward. That I spent a long time sitting with regret, not the kind that begs for reversal, but the kind that demands reflection. I stopped asking what I wanted and started asking who I had become. The answers weren't comfortable. I saw how easily loneliness can masquerade as justification, How unmet needs can quietly rewrite morals if you let them. Growth didn't come with relief. It came with accountability. With accepting that love isn't just a feeling you protect when it's easy, but a responsibility you honor even when it's inconvenient. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could refuse to minimize it. That mattered more than forgiveness I hadn't earned yet. There were moments I wanted to romanticize the journey, to frame it as self-discovery or destiny. But the truth was simpler and heavier. I made choices. Those choices had consequences. Some doors closed permanently. Some trust fractured beyond repair. And some lessons arrived only because something precious was lost. Over time, the chaos settled into something quieter. Not peace, exactly, but understanding. I learned that trying something new doesn't automatically mean growth. Sometimes it just exposes what you were avoiding. Sometimes transformation comes from facing the damage, not escaping it. That I don't tell this story to justify what I did. I tell it because pretending infidelity is about passion or excitement misses the point. It's about disconnection, fear, and the stories we tell ourselves to survive them. It's about how easy it is to drift when you stop paying attention. My life did change completely. Not because I followed desire, but because I faced the consequences of doing so. I lost certainty. I lost comfort. I lost the illusion that love can be put on pause without cost. What I gained was clarity, earned the hard way. That if there's one truth that remains, it's this: you don't transform your life the moment you cross a line. You transform it when you finally take responsibility for why you were standing there in the first place.